We're going to start with that court decision on the assassination of Lebanon Minister Rafik Hariri in 2005. The UN-backed court has convicted a Hezbollah member of involvement in the killing. 3 other suspects have been acquitted. Here's Judge David Reed delivering his verdict in the Netherlands.
The trial chamber is therefore satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that Mr. Ayyash possessed the requisite knowledge that the explosive device was liable to create a public danger. That is also the only conclusion that is reasonably available from the evidence. The same evidence establishes beyond reasonable doubt his knowledge and his intention to murder Mr. Hariri with explosive materials. The trial chamber therefore finds Mr. Ayyash guilty beyond reasonable doubt as a co-perpetrator of the intentional homicide of Mr. Rafik Hariri.
Well, Rafik Hariri's death was a watershed moment for Lebanon. It led to rival alliances that shape politics still today. Before we go any further, let's recap on the attack in 2005 with our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen.
On the 14th of February 2005, a massive bomb blew up the motorcade of Rafik al-Hariri, the former Prime Minister who was campaigning for re-election. It killed Hariri and 21 others. One of the first to reach him was Hariri's long-serving bodyguard, Mohammed Dia, who wants justice.
To start with, I couldn't tell if it was him from his face. I was reeling. Some of the guys told me to check his face, his back, or his hair to see if it was him. But I could only tell it was him from his wedding ring.
At the funeral, his supporters were already accusing Syria's President Assad of ordering the killing. A few months earlier, Assad had threatened him for questioning Syria's right to dominate Lebanon. During the 2000 election campaign, Hariri chose his words carefully when I asked him who ran Lebanon.
The Syrians helped so much in assuring the security and stability in the country. But in political basis, there is a coordination and there is a cooperation between the Syrian and the Lebanese leaders, and so they have influence beyond any doubt.
At many rallies over 15 years, Hezbollah, the most powerful political and military force in Lebanon, has denied the accusation that its men carried out the assassination, perhaps on the orders of its allies Syria and Iran. Its leader, Hassan Nasrallah, refused to allow the arrest of the 4 indicted Hezbollah men who otherwise would be in court to hear the verdict.
Well, the judge convicted Salim Ayyash of a terrorist act, assassination and the murders of 21 other victims. He was tried in absentia alongside 3 other Hezbollah members. All their whereabouts are unknown. A 5th suspect, a Hezbollah commander, was dropped from the indictment after he died in Syria in 2016. However, prosecutors described him as overall controller of the operation. Well, the judge said the assassination was undoubtedly a political act, but he came to this conclusion.
The trial chamber is of the view that Syria and Hezbollah may have had motives to eliminate Mr. Hariri and some of his political allies. However, there was no evidence that the Hezbollah leadership had any involvement in Mr. Hariri's murder, and there is no direct evidence of Syrian involvement in it.
Well, author and non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Endowment think tank, Kim Gattis, was quick to point this out. Verdict did not exonerate Hezbollah leadership. It indicted key operative, determined another senior, now dead, was involved in plot. Tribunal said there was no evidence to link more senior leadership, but doesn't mean there is evidence of innocence. Well, the prosecution's case was centred around mobile phone records, which they say showed the suspects were tracking Mr. Hariri before his assassination. However, the evidence was entirely circumstantial, which was difficult to prove, as Anna Holligan explains.
The way this complex operation was carried out was so sophisticated. It was done in a way that kept the disparate parts separate from each other, so they couldn't necessarily have known about the plan. So, for example, the purchase of this truck that was loaded with explosives that was bought in Tripoli, that was detonated by the suicide bomber on Valentine's Day 2005, the recruitment of a 22-year-old man at a mosque to appear in this diversion video that was shared by the assassins allegedly on the day of his killing, all of these parts put together, and the judges said actually the only person who it was proved beyond reasonable doubt was involved due to links between his personal mobile phone and a red network of mobile phones that were involved, so co-locating his own phone. And the phone that was part of this red network was Salim Ayyash.
Well, the trial was held at a special UN-backed court in Leitsendam, a small town outside The Hague. Some of the victims' families were there to hear the verdict. Saad Hariri, that's Rafik's son, was there. He was Prime Minister himself for 6 years, and he spoke afterwards.
For the first time, I can say, in Lebanon, in a political assassination of a former prime minister or a president, we had like many presidents and many former prime ministers were killed either in office or outside office, and we never had any truth of what happened. I think today's, everybody's expectation was much higher than what came out, but I believe that the tribunal came out with a result that is satisfying. We accept it.
Well, as well as saying he was satisfied, Saad Hariri also hit out at Hezbollah, saying they must assume responsibility for his father's killing. He said it was clear that the network responsible is from its ranks. And he added, "We will not rest until the punishment is carried out." So, two possibly conflicting messages. Paul Adams is in Beirut and puts that in context.
The thing that I think is important to realise is that the organisation that was accused of involvement in the death of Rafik Hariri 15 years ago, even if only one member of that organisation has now been found guilty, Hezbollah, has gone from being not just a military force in the country, but to the dominant political force too. You cannot rule this country or frankly do anything economic or political without the cooperation and involvement of Hezbollah. And that means that if you are Saad Hariri, who has already served 2 terms as Prime Minister, and you're thinking you might have another shot in the future, frankly, you're going to have to make another deal with Hezbollah in the future. The very organisation who you probably believe in your heart of hearts was involved in the death of your father. That's a pretty extraordinary situation for any politician to be in, but I think it's a measure of what you describe rightly as the complexity and the sometimes rather Byzantine nature of Lebanese politics.
His eldest son, Baha Hariri, and he's been speaking to my colleague Matthew Amroliwala here on BBC World News about this verdict.
To me, he was not only my father. To many Lebanese, I believe he was the father of a nation. We were very close. He wanted to take Lebanon from a country to a unified nation. It was very clear that his dream did not become a reality. The courts made sure that this reality comes to light. It's crystal clear to the court that there's indirect evidence that it is a political act. They talked about the 3rd Bristol meeting that happened, that they talked about when Walid Maalem came to him, and Rafik was very adamant when he told him, "I'm 3/4 opposition and 1/4 not." And Syria cannot keep on interfering, and he asked for the full implementation of the Taif Accord because he believed Lebanon is on its way to become a unified nation.
And yet you will have heard the judge say explicitly his assessment that Hezbollah's leadership was not involved, the Syrian government was not involved. What did you make of those comments?
As we know, Salim Ayyash is a senior operative in the Hezbollah structure. That was extremely clear, and he was accused for all counts. But the most important to me that it is very clear that there was no political vacuum when this happened. This act happened, actually the contrary. There was the political situation was extremely charged, and the decision, the court was very clear that the decision of the assassination happened after this very charged environment between the third Bristol meeting, his meeting with the minister, Walid Maalem. It's very clear it's a political act, a political assassination.
Can there be justice until this man is actually detained? Because as you will well know, as everyone knows, this was a trial with the 4 defendants in absentia.
Yes, to me, the only justice we should have now, as you know, we have a full economic collapse, we have a full financial collapse, and then we had the disaster that happened in Beirut. You know, that disaster led to the death of over 200 people, and we're still counting, we're still mourning all these families. I, for myself, I have colleagues, they escaped, but some members of my colleagues died. So to us, all this accumulation, is the responsibility falls on this marriage, wherever a relation between Hezbollah and the warlords, and whomever they supported, whoever supported them in the last 15 years. So the full responsibility is on that, and with Lebanese are in full divorce between them and that configuration.
But you will know that there is, as Anna Holligan was saying earlier, zero chance of Hezbollah handing him over. And in terms of your brother, we heard him talking outside of the tribunal, also reflecting his desire for justice to be complete. And yet we know that Hezbollah is ingrained in every aspect of Lebanon's life, political and military, and yet your brother would like another attempt at being Prime Minister, and he needs Hezbollah's support. That's an extraordinary dynamic happening at the same time, is it not?
To me, it's very clear now that the Lebanese people are in full divorce with that configuration. It is crystal clear to me that this configuration cannot continue because it led to utter disaster. Moody's graded us to see junk. We have food inflation at 250%. The economy is at full collapse. Where do we stop? Another disaster? Another Beirut? I called for an international investigation. It's crystal clear that hopefully, I'm very glad that the FBI is coming. It sheds light to where this is going. So it is crystal clear. We tried the other way. We tried the help.
To your brother, then also crystal clear that in any political dynamic he thinks of moving forward in terms of trying to become Lebanon's Prime Minister again, that has to exclude in any shape or form Hezbollah.
To me, all that configuration, including, and I said, the Hezbollah and the warlords and anyone who supported them in the last 15 years must go. I'm very clear in what I'm saying.
Very briefly, can there be justice unless more of those involved in this assassination end up in a court, end up in a jail? Well,
it's crystal clear that a senior operative of Hezbollah was fully guilty of all these charges, and as you know, I've always believed in the international justice system. Without it, the world will be in a different place, and I truly believe that sooner or later justice will prevail.
Shibli Malat is a Lebanese international lawyer. He's called the verdict a letdown in justice. Here's why.
As to motive, it's very clear that the president of Syria had a very strong motive in the assassination of Mr. Hariri because he had refused to submit to the Syrian diktat. And the fact that this tribunal, through 15 years, doesn't find a few hours to go question a person whose motive is so strong is nothing else than a grave dereliction of duty.
15 years since Rafik Hariri's death, and Lebanon is very much still a country in crisis. To remind us, here's Paul Adams.
Here in Beirut, almost literally 2 weeks ago to the minute, which continues to overshadow everything here, plus the fact that we are about to go into another coronavirus lockdown in the next couple of days, plus the fact that since late last year, this country has been spiraling into an appalling economic crisis combined with political paralysis. You know, the events that took place just over there 15 years ago do seem to most people a little bit remote.